be a little bit better now. I've cut down the what
Okay,
we're
it's
doing.
just appearing.
Yeah. So can you hear that?
Hang on. Yep, I can hear it.
Right.
Like
Cool.
a rewinding tape, scratching disc type thing.
Yeah. That's good. That's basically me just fucking about on the decks, so they're coming through on both screens. So, let's see if this works. It should go fresh, and it's the other turn. Come on.
Can only be attributable to human error.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Air.
There's no video.
There will be. I just haven't pressed the
Ah,
button
okay.
yet. Oh, it's Control Shift. That's why. Yes. What a great start to our very first ever live stream. I can't press Control Shift 9 because I'm a little bit of a moron. Hello and welcome to Fresh Air's Sci-Fi video show. We're going to be discussing either science, philosophy, or both. It'll be both hard and soft sciences and all of that sort of thing. If you haven't listened to the Fresh Air podcast, we've recorded 2 seasons so far, and we're recording our third. Some of the episodes can be incredibly long at times, and sometimes we split them up into short chapters. And so, we speak of a number of different topics. It's generally a high sort of philosophical edge to it, but we talk about a multitude of things, from epistemology to morality, politics, reason, rationality. We do cover off a bit of science stuff as well, especially the whole science versus pseudoscience and all the conspiracy crap that goes on. But with the sci-fi show, we hope to do something a little bit different. We're going to focus on more specific topics, probably smaller topics in the small space of time. It's going to give us an opportunity to bring more people in. We're going to have a live stream. You should nearly always see Dave and I for the Sci-Fi podcast. But don't worry, I know you love the other guys from the Fresh Air podcast, so they will be dropping in and out as well. We'd also like to get people who are potentially more specialist in various fields as well. So if we're doing something on psychology, it might be nice to get a psychotherapist in, for example. So we've got loads of different ideas of what we want to do with this. Now, today, as I said, is Dave. He is here with me. He is a philosophy master's student, just doing his dissertation. He's been a blogger and podcaster with Answers in Reason for years, and he has been an atheist and philosopher since he was very, very, very young. So,
Very
Dave,
young.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm old and knackered. Now, I study philosophy with the Open University. I have a BA in philosophy and psychology, and I'm just finishing up my master's in philosophy. I've been an atheist since I was a kid. Just never really been convinced by religious beliefs or anything, or arguments for God. But I enjoyed the conversation nonetheless. When it comes to atheism, I'm more of a belief that God doesn't exist. But when it comes to philosophy, I'm more interested in discussions of ethics, value, political discussions, epistemology, and all that kind of stuff.
That sounds great. And actually, what you bring up there is something that I would actually like to discuss on today's stream. Now, you might notice that there's music going on in the background. That's because we're trying something a little bit different. We're going to try and have a philosophical conversation whilst I try and have a mix. And I must admit, this is the first time I've had a mix in about 2 years, but I've got a very expensive set of digital turntables that I just don't use anymore. So I apologise for the sloppy mixing, but hopefully the volume is low enough that you don't actually realise how terrible I am at DJing.
You're awesome.
It's not often you have this sort of thing go on. I mean, philosophy and drum and bass, man.
A philosophical rave.
Yeah, why not?
Descartes and bass.
I like it. Maybe that's what we should call it. But yeah, so tonight we're gonna discuss a topic that's been going along a lot on Twitter recently. It's prescriptivism. So Dave, take it away. Tell us what prescriptivism is.
It's basically the discussion on Twitter and stuff is mostly about how the term atheist is used. To be a prescriptivist would be to say that somebody has to use a word in a particular way and they're not allowed to use it in the way that they might use it differently.
And why is prescriptivism a bad thing?
Because it's just not how words work.
So, words, language. Would you say that that is a more descriptive thing? So tell us the difference between what something descriptive is and something prescriptive is.
Okay, if we're speaking descriptively, we're describing how the word is being used. So we can say that this group of people uses the word this way, this group of people uses the word that way. None of them use the word incorrectly, they just use it the way they use it. Whereas prescriptive would be to say that those people are using the word wrong and shouldn't be using it that way.
So, is there any times where there is a correct use of a word?
Technical language, mainly. So, like if you're discussing science, you would say theory means a body of collected facts and an explanation for those collected facts.
So, with other things within science, would you say that there's a contextually correct definition of evolution as well? It's not just simply a changing kind.
Yeah, exactly. And the same thing in philosophy. If you're speaking of a certain, like, say you're speaking epistemologically, certain words will have certain meanings within the context of that discussion.
Right, yeah, so that makes sense. So, realistically, we can't necessarily take a dictionary definition and say that is the correct definition or the only definition then.
No, we can't, because dictionaries are just set out to describe how a word is used in any society when the dictionary is written.
Right, okay. So we would say that maybe a dictionary represents the most common use of a term in a particular environment.
Yeah, correct.
So if we think about on the internet, where the definition of atheism is quite commonly known as a lack of belief in gods, it would be the standard definition for an internet dictionary, maybe.
Yeah.
But if we were to use maybe the Oxford English Dictionary or the Cambridge Dictionary, we might see something that perhaps represented the more philosophical definition of atheism.
Yeah, it depends on how expansive the dictionary is trying to be.
So some dictionaries might encapsulate all different uses all the way through. Some might just go for one or two definitions.
Yeah.
And so we can't necessarily take a dictionary definition to be the correct definition. Is that what we're saying?
No, we can use it to argue that this is the way the word is most commonly used within this group of people, but that's about it. Words don't have intrinsic properties that say they must be used this way.
Cool. Alright. So anyone that is saying that this is the right definition, this is the only definition, is essentially being prescriptive and is technically wrong because that is not how language works.
Correct.
Cool. All right. So I think that we need to have a think about this. Think about sort of the things that we say. Now, I think we should try something called a quick fire round. You might recognise them from
The weakest link?
yeah, any of those things. I think right now I am the weakest link. I do apologise. So I'm going to turn the music down for the sake of this, and we're going to enter our quick fire round, Dave. We're going to try and get all of these. I want you to give as short and snappy answers as you can to these questions. And if there's anything that needs expanding on it, we can either cover it after the quick fire round or we can do it in another chapter of this. Okay, you ready?
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, what do we mean by normative?
How something ought to be done or used.
What is the normative definition of atheism?
In philosophy, it is the belief that God does not exist.
And how do we know that this is the normative definition of atheism within philosophy?
Because it's argued for that way.
And are other definitions of atheism valid?
Of course they are.
What's a belief?
It's something that we accept to be true as part of our everyday outlook on the universe.
And what is a disbelief?
It's something we think is not true about the universe.
What do we mean by suspension of judgment?
When we don't actually hold a belief one way or the other, we don't believe or disbelieve.
What's another name for suspension of judgment?
Agnostic or agnosticism.
And are rocks atheist?
Depends on who you ask. But no.
Why not?
Because they don't have mental states.
Boom. Right, that's the end of the quick fire round. Now, is there anything there that you feel that we should pick up on at all? Is there anything in there that you think that is worth discussing a little bit further?
Not really. Anything you feel should be expanded on?
Well, I think that there is, when something is like a normative definition, I think that we need to, how does something become a normative definition and why is it that normative definition? And how do we actually know that it is a normative definition? I think that needs probably a little bit of expansion. So, for example, the normative definition of atheism is the belief God or gods do not exist.
Okay, in philosophy, the term atheism or the term theism is seen as a proposition. It's still held as a belief that God exists. But what we're interested in is not the actual psychological state, but the content of the belief. So the actual proposition itself that God exists. And from that, you get the body of literature. So if somebody says God exists and you answer yes, you are speaking of theism. If you answer no, God does not exist, you are speaking of atheism. If you say I don't hold a belief one way or the other, you're essentially speaking of what today is considered a kind of weak agnosticism.
Right, so that all makes sense to me, but what about that makes that the normative definition over someone just responding no to the question, do you believe in God or gods?
Because it gives a direct answer to what the person thinks about the proposition. It's not just descriptive of a psychological state. It's an actual claim about the makeup of reality, or it's an ontological claim.
So is there a specific terminology for that answer? Rather than just saying we're describing a psychological state, we're giving a particular. We're not just giving a, we lack belief in this. It's giving an epistemological.
You could say it's an
answer.
epistemological answer, yeah.
Yeah. So if it's giving an epistemological answer, then at the very least we would say that because when we're discussing beliefs and knowledge, we want to get epistemological answers, and therefore defining it this way is the only true way we get to that epistemological answer. And therefore,
Yeah, it basically makes discussion clearer.
right. And there are a number of different ontological positions in regards to the proposition God exists. There's those three epistemological answers, but people can actually think about it in a different way. That's not necessarily giving a direct answer to it, but there are also people who think that the concept of God is meaningless, and therefore they don't even really consider it, and they would be considered agnostic as well.
Yeah, they don't consider it a proposition.
Right. And then there's the people who just don't care. The atheists, basically. They don't care whether God exists or not, so they don't consider it either. Would you say, though, that that's somehow a form of agnosticism in a way, because they're sort of suspending judgment, but suspending it because they don't care?
They're still making a judgment in a sense. Yes, I suppose you could call them agnostic because they don't believe one way or the other. But they're still making a judgment in the fact that they think that the idea is nonsense or not worthy of thinking about.
Could we also apply a terminology like that as a modifier? So, for example, I'm an atheist like you. I hold the belief gods do not exist. But I care less and less about this conversation. And, at the moment, I don't really care if gods do or don't exist. I just want people to be good people. So therefore, I've become atheistic in regards to that question, but I still hold the belief gods do not exist. So could we say I'm an atheistic atheist, or am I just an atheist that doesn't care? I'm just wondering if these modifiers do make any sort of sense.
They do, but generally you're answering two different questions there.
Yeah.
So if somebody said, what's your attitude towards God? You would be better off saying that you're an atheist, because that's your main sort of sense of your attitude towards the proposition.
Even though I also hold the belief gods don't exist, because I no longer care about the conversation anymore, it's probably clearer to say atheist.
Yeah, because when you say you believe gods don't exist, you're mostly speaking of a psychological sense, a psychological state in that sense, because if you're not concerned about the contents of that propositional belief, an atheist would be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's also been something that I've seen happen a lot on the internet recently, and that is defining someone who is holds the belief gods don't exist as an anti-theist. Now, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, tell me, what is your understanding of what an anti-theist is?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me either, because an anti-theist is somebody who actively opposes religion, actively opposes belief in God. I know a lot of modern atheists they think really highly of somebody like Christopher Hitchens, and he considered himself an anti-theist in the sense that he opposed religion. And one of the other things that's sort of amusing about this new push to make anti-theism the belief that God does not exist is that they're being sticklers about the A prefix and saying it must be used correctly, but then discarding the idea that the word anti has to be used in the way it's supposed to be used.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's focus just for a second on that A prefix. So that A prefix can mean either not or without. So without tends to be absence, basically, whereas the A as not tends to be negation. So, like Dave was saying earlier, he described the theism versus atheism. The atheism is not just simply not theism; it is the belief God does not exist. Um, so it's not simply without theism. Now, the A can mean that, but not in this context. So when we get to this, they're focusing on something it can be. So the A can be without, so you can define it that way, even though it's not necessarily supposed to be. Yet anti has a very specific meaning, doesn't it?
It means against or opposing.
So if we've got that, so we've got anti-theism. Theism is the belief does not exist. We're against people with the belief that God exists. So how can that just be, I believe gods don't exist? That's not being anti. I'm perfectly fine with people believing in God or gods. You know, I might believe gods and I'm not an anti-theist, yet I get called an anti-theist by people who are trying to do this. So the problem comes is they've conflated all forms of non-theist to be atheist. So if you are not a theist, you are an atheist. So anyone who lacks belief not holds that positive belief. So what they've then had to do is create a new position for someone who holds the belief gods does not exist. And they've decided to turn that into anti-theism, which doesn't make much sense to me. I don't know. It's just this extension of language, and obviously language is descriptive, so technically they can define an anti-theist as a cheese sandwich if they really want to. They're not necessarily wrong, but the more you change and move away from normative definitions, the less clear you become on a particular topic.
Very true. And it becomes even more kind of nonsensical when you're declaring grammatical rules must be followed for one definition, but then discarding them in another definition.
I mean, this sounds like we're coming back to the whole issue with special pleading again.
It essentially is a form of that. It's not exactly that, but it's along the same lines.
Yeah. I mean, we do see a lot of the whole special pleading. So what we mean by that whole special pleading thing is if atheists are only defined by what they lack belief in, then it is special pleading if we don't allow theists to be defined by what they lack belief in too. So if we consider the way the logic works that Dave was speaking about earlier, if a belief is something we accept as true, a positive attitude towards a proposition, for example, a theist believes a god or any number of gods, at least one god exists. They accept that a god exists, and therefore they don't accept or lack belief in gods not existing. So in the normative sense, an atheist will believe gods do not exist and therefore lack belief in gods existing. So there we've got those two opposites of that sort of spectrum. But then we've also got the agnostic position, which lacks belief in both propositions. They lack belief in God existing and they lack belief in God not existing. So the problem is there, if we define things only by what they lack, that means that the agnostic is a theistic atheist or an atheistic theist, which is a contradiction. It doesn't make sense. So then you have to say, well, no, it only matters for the atheist. Only the atheist is defined by what they lack belief in, and the theist is by what they believe in. You're like, well, no, that's special pleading, because you're holding them to different standards.
I mean, there is an argument you could make here where you say something like, the atheist means that you are essentially defining it according to a lack of something because the A means without. But that's an etymological fallacy anyway.
And, yeah, I mean, we definitely deal with a lot of different things like that going on, don't we? I mean, the number of conversations. I'm actually sick to death of the definitional conversations that we have on Twitter and all of that. The reason I get into them is because people are being prescriptive with their definition. They are telling people who want to be defined as agnostics that they're atheists because they're not theists. And it's like, well, no, they're not. They're telling me that I'm an anti-theist because I hold the beliefs that God... No, I'm an atheist. In the normative sense, I'm an atheist. If you want to define yourself that way, that's fine, but don't apply your definition to me, especially when it doesn't follow the rules of logic and provide an epistemological answer. You're confusing things. I don't want to be known by your terminology, but it's fine for you to use your terminology for yourself.
Exactly. It's one of the reasons I don't really get into it. It's an argument that goes nowhere really, because those people who want it defined as lack of belief won't ever allow it to be defined any other way for them.
Yeah, and it's a shame, really, because, I mean, there's so many better conversations to have. I think when you're having a conversation with people, the main thing to do is try and iron out terms and say, do you know what, even if I don't agree with this term, we will use this term as you use it for the sake of this conversation, and based on these parameters, yes, no, etc., etc. But sometimes you just get stuck on that initial bit where you're so focused on, no, I'm using this, no, I'm using this, and then you get people going, no, only mine's right. And that is when it gets a little bit more frustrating, because why is your definition the right one?
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it, agnostic atheists, as they call themselves, could save themselves some time simply by saying that they're agnostic in the traditional sense, because it's the same thing. They all claim that they don't know if God exists, but they don't believe God. They don't know if God doesn't exist, but they don't believe he does.
But they also don't believe he doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Saying that you don't know something doesn't necessarily entail that you don't believe it, but in the way that they use it, they also say, I don't believe God doesn't exist. I don't know it. So they're fulfilling the traditional agnostic stance. So they could just save themselves some time in writing by just calling themselves agnostics.
Yeah, definitely. And also the modifier is kind of superfluous as well, isn't it? Because if all you do is lack belief, well, you can't know something if you don't believe it anyway. So if atheism is literally a lack belief in gods, then you're already saying you don't know anyway. So
Exactly.
Either way, if it's just a lack of belief in gods, you don't need to add the I don't know modifier. And agnosticism doesn't just mean it's not just about knowledge. It's far more than that. It's
it's a lot more nuanced.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was originally an epistemic principle that was by T.H. Huxley, saying we should not believe or we should not claim to believe or know that which we do not have any scientific evidence for, but now it's a psychological state of withholding judgment or suspense of judgment where you lack belief both ways. So for it, people to say, oh, I'm an agnostic atheist because it means I don't know but I don't believe, it's just it's ridiculous and a little bit nonsensical. What it actually comes closer to meaning is I'm suspending judgment on if I'm an atheist or not. That's basically, when you put those two words together. I know that's not what you mean by it, but that is basically what it means.
How it reads, yeah.
Yeah. But it obviously only reads that way to people who know what these terms actually mean. So this is the whole language thing. It's common use. People know that you don't mean that. In fact, they don't even know that that's where it's come from. People think that agnosticism does only relate to knowledge. People think that atheism is only a lack of belief in gods. People will say that that's a fact and that's the only definition. But a lot of people talk about these things without spending much time looking into it. And it's a big problem.
Yeah, they hear it mentioned on a Facebook group or on Twitter or something, and they hear their favorite YouTubers or public speakers say it, and they hear it said by it picks up speed, and they hear it said by so many, it becomes a fact.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean that was my initial experience of it. Before I entered the world of the internet, I thought that an atheist was someone that believed gods don't exist, or that claimed gods did not exist. And I remember being promptly corrected. I think it was in a Facebook group called "Does God Exist?" And because all the atheists were telling me I was wrong, I suppose it was a bit of an ad populum on my front. I had nothing else to go on, and I went, oh, well, these are all the atheists. They're telling me this is what it means. And I actually fought for that definition without looking too much into it myself. I was guilty of that. I was guilty of an ad populum. I took on what my tribe were telling me was the case. I didn't look further into it. And when I finally did, I realised I was wrong.
It happens. I mean, I've written stuff where I started out with putting atheism, the belief God does not exist, and I got dogpiled by atheists who would argue that I'm using the term incorrectly, so I would have to change it to lack a belief in God, just so that the actual content could be discussed, rather than their belief that atheism can never mean this thing.
Yeah. It's sort of crazy how it goes that way, isn't it? Really, it's focusing on things that don't really matter. They don't take the time to understand the other side of it. They're so fixed with their anchors, and to be honest, we all do it. It's completely natural to do, but so many people have these discussions with their preconceived notions of this is the way it is. This is the way it's got to be. Anything that you say that contests that is actually wrong.
Yeah, I find it odd, especially coming from a group of people who promote the idea of learning and promote the idea that they never form a belief without rock solid evidence.
Yeah, no, you're right there. It's incredibly interesting. I mean, I've done it myself as well, but I think that's the thing when you do have that sort of tribe-like mentality, and that's natural for all humans to do. But when you've got a group of atheists all saying sort of the same thing, and if half the group are saying something, and the second you go, well, could it be? And everyone's like, no! You're like, okay then. And your opinion on it is technically squashed, and sometimes you're afraid to look past it. And you sort of see this thing with people who are religious. They are afraid to leave their religion because they will be cast out of their church, of their family, of their community. They're, even if they, it doesn't change them necessarily as a person. They just no longer believe in their God, but they don't go against the grain, and they keep their mouth shut, and they maybe carry on pretending as if they believe, so that they don't lose that community. And we atheists talk about this all the time, yet we do this to other atheists as well. And it's crazy. We speak so much about how religion is bad, and how we do this and that and whatever, and we do the same sort of shit to each other. And it's quite ironic, really, that we don't even realize that we're doing it.
Absolutely.
Right, I mean, is there anything else on this topic you think that we need to cover off, Dave?
No, that's done a pretty good job.
Well, in that case, I am going to put ourselves into a state of signing off for the night then. We have had a wonderful short conversation about prescriptivism and normativity, and we have been I've enjoyed this. I enjoyed the fire round. I've really enjoyed you being here, Dave. I mean, how have you found it?
I've loved it, to be honest. I kind of like doing content like this.
Yeah, I think that we should try and do this a bit more. I think our plans for the future is perhaps, I mean, this has just been a bit of a test recording, but we're going to publish it anyway. I think plans for the future is we'll try and get on a few quick streams like this a week. We'll keep doing Fresh Air, of course. I want to, obviously keep doing Fresh Air, but I think there's a lot of work that goes into the Fresh Air episodes, and there's a lot of production that goes into it. So you consider that we do a 3-hour show or something like that. That takes me at least 9 hours to produce. So there's a lot that goes into that, and I don't necessarily have the time to do that as much as I did before. I've got a 7-month-old child. I'm recently married. I've got all of that sort of stuff going on, and a full-time job. So I think that if we do the Fresh Air, we focus on really good quality episodes of Fresh Air, but release them incrementally. And we do stuff like this. I mean, guys, anyone out there who's been watching tonight or is going to be watching the rerun, we're really, really, really interested in your feedback. I can see actually in the chat we've got Martin says he's finding it very difficult to masturbate to this.
Yeah, the other thing about this as well is we have more direct contact with anybody that, you know, wants to share their ideas with us or want to have discussion with us.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that we can get people in on our Discord server. It's Answers in Reason. We'll post links to that sort of thing. And I mean, we really want to get people involved. We'll add you into the Discord server, and you can come in on and join us. And you know, any questions or anything like that you have, any feedback that you have, we're interested. If you don't like the music, or if you don't like the fact that we're playing music at all, please let us know. I mean, the main thing is we want to be entertaining for you. You know, that's the end of it. We want to make sure that we are putting on a show that you want to listen to. So if the music doesn't work for you, whether it's genre or whatever, or if it's too loud or it's too quiet, then let us know. We want you to be more focused on what we're saying, the discussions that we're having. So if you feel that, you know, we will go for what the masses want with the whole music side of things. I know that I was at the beginning I had a little mix, but after that I put a couple of my pre-recorded mixes on because I was really engaged on the conversation. One thing that I would like to do is maybe in the future get someone on to have a debate with Dave, and then I can sort of focus on the mixing side of things, whilst Dave and whoever else is on with us can have that discussion. But obviously, if you guys are all finding the music too distracting, then I can cut it out completely. I don't need to have my turntables on the go. It's just
but it's fun.
Yeah, it was definitely fun. I enjoyed doing it. It was an excuse to get them out, and I look forward to being able to focus on them a little bit more. That is one of the things that is hard, trying to hold a conversation and remembering how many bars you've got until you've got to drop that next track in, cut out the bass here and add a little bit of mid there, and oh fuck, wait, what's going on? What did Dave just say?
But yeah, it'd be nice to have people come on for discussions, and also we'll be coming for you, T-Jump.
Yes, in fact, the next one of these we do, I think we are going to be addressing his moral theories, aren't we? We're going to be playing a few clips of his videos that Dave is going to actually put together, and I'm going to get those going out on the stream. And yeah, I think that one will be a bit interesting. I've only heard a few bits about what he said. I've not actually watched any of his videos. So what I want to do with this, Dave, if you don't mind, I want it to be a fresh watch for me, so we have a genuine reaction from me of what he says. So maybe what we'll do is, if you collect a few clips and you share your screen, and we'll play it that way and see how that goes.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good to me. He's got a few debates that I can go to.
Excellent. Well, I very much look forward to doing that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, this is it. This is the SciPhi broadcast from the guys of Fresh Air who run Answers in Reason. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, all, and good night, Joe and Martijn.
Yeah, good night, guys. Have a good one. Now I need to remember what button I pressed to go back to the main screen. There it is. Oh, look at that. Yeah, www.answers-inreason.com.
Read
Yeah.
us, because we're awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of good content on there. There is. Especially Dave's articles and Martijn's articles.
And Joe's.
Some of mine are okay.
We're
Ignore a
all
lot.
pretty smart.
Ignore a lot of my older ones. I was a little bit more of a bellend back then. I mean, I'm still a bellend now, but I was more obviously a bellend back then, whereas I almost sound like I'm not completely dumb anymore.
My belly makes me look like a bell. Does that count?
Right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a good night.